So now that we have a broad understanding of the three categories of depression, i.e. the three severities of depression and the corresponding symptoms, primary symptoms of depression, we can kind of bring them together in what I refer to as this Depression Severity Range Scale. So on this side of the line, we have the lowest severity with respect to depressive symptoms. And on this end of the line, we have the highest severity with respect to depressive symptoms. And in the middle, we have minor depressive disorder. So this is kind of a neat way to just take all that information and present it in a way that's a little bit more visual friendly, so to speak. So if we look at the lowest severity of depression at this far end of the line of this range scale, so to speak, we have dysthymic disorder. And the criteria to meet the condition for having a dysthymic disorder is that you have to have at least 2 of the following symptoms and have been dealing with them for at least 2 years. And what are these particular symptoms? Sleep disorder, worthlessness, hopelessness, energy deficit, and appetite disorder. So again, this is the lowest severity with respect to depression. And obviously you're not going to find the primary symptom of suicidality on this list. Okay, obviously it would belong over here. And with that said, if we look at the highest severity, we have major depressive disorder. And the criteria is that you have to be struggling with at least 4 symptoms in addition to interest deficit as being one of the primary symptoms for at least 2 weeks straight. So you have to be dealing with these for 2 weeks. And the symptoms are sleep disorder, guilt, energy deficit, concentration deficit, appetite disorder, agitation, and suicidality, of course. Now remember, guilt in that is worthlessness, hopelessness, and regret. Okay, that's kind of combined in there. So, you have to be dealing with at least 4 of these for a period of at least 2 weeks to meet the condition of major depression. So one thing I've learned with respect to this particular category, minor depressive disorder, is that because it leans more on the cognitive symptoms and less on the neurovegetative or primary symptoms, there's a fair bit of overlap going both ways. I mean, obviously, if you are dealing with major depressive disorder or even dysthymic disorder, you're going to feel bouts of sadness. Okay, you're going to have loss of pleasure. You're going to be irritable in your mood. You're going to be pessimistic. Like, these are some of the common underlying feelings that you would have when struggling with this disorder. What we're interested in is just measuring the severity of depression, and if it falls somewhere in the middle here, then yes, it's a little bit more serious than dysthymic disorder. It's not as serious as major depressive disorder, so it would fall within this minor depressive disorder range. But it's intuitively, we're going to be dealing with a lot of these cognitive symptoms in our primary symptoms anyway. So for all intents and purposes, I basically ignore this concept of minor depressive disorder on this depression severity range scale. So what I'll tend to do is just simply erase this and focus more on the 2 extremes, being dysthymic disorder and major depressive disorder. So just by taking out the minor depressive disorder, which again is a fair bit of overlap both ways with respect to that particular category of depression. So just by taking it out, we can focus more on the polar extremes, the lowest severity and the highest severity. So the question is, where do you lie on this range? How would you rank on this range with respect to your own symptoms? And this model could be used very crudely to give you a sense as to where you are on this particular line of severity with respect to mental illness. It doesn't necessarily mean that, okay, I must be depressed, so I have to do this. It's the very simple question: are you depressed? And if you even think so, if you suspect you might be dealing with depression, just to suspect it, then that's the first step. And the first step is to, okay, all right, it might be depression, so let's entertain this a little bit. Maybe we can get a sense of just, how depressed I am. And this is just a little simple model to kind of give you a sense of just where you are, how serious is it? Because sometimes, like I said, when we're treading in that deep, dark well and we're in that real dark place, I mean, it's hard to see things. It's hard to think clearly at times. And it's hard to get a solid perspective on things, particularly with respect to our mental health. So this is just a little tool that you can use just to simply see where are you on this scale. And as an example, I'll illustrate it with my own with my own experience. So for me, when I looked at the primary symptoms of depression, okay, so let's think of it in logic. If I was only dealing with a couple of things, such as I was losing sleep and I didn't have a lot of energy, and that was been kind of characteristic of me over the last couple of years, then I would just check this off, and chances are I would be right around this lowest severity. So not too concerning, but definitely you should still seek help. You should still call your doctor and get some help with this. But for me, that was not the case. I was dealing with many symptoms, many of these primary symptoms. And sleep disorder, yes, I was losing a lot of sleep throughout my disorder. Okay, when things started, firing up and I was feeling these triggers and the symptoms were, just too much to bear, I was losing a lot of sleep, and I was losing a lot of sleep for a very long time. Just my mind racing constantly and I can't settle, right? Guilt. Yes, that was definitely and still is a symptom that I contend with, all right? But through therapy, I'm able to cope with that guilt that does from time to time come back and try to haunt me. I can now cope with it in a healthy way. I can manage my symptoms in a healthy way today, but back then, I could not. And it was really weighing on me. It became very overwhelming. And in that guilt category, we also have worthlessness and hopelessness and regret. Those are things also that I was contending with in my disorder. Energy deficit. I did okay with energy deficit because I did force myself to work out and do exercise because I recognized in my disorder that it did make me feel better when I did those things. So I forced myself to do that to try to offset the impact of these symptoms or the severity of the symptoms. Even when that mental storm came in hard, by just simply exercising, it really helped me weather the storm, so to speak. I mean, I still got beaten. I still, it was very difficult, but at the same time, it just made things less painful by simply exercising. So energy deficit, that was not something that was a very common symptom for me. Concentration deficit, absolutely. Many times I would just find myself spaced out. I just couldn't focus on the task at hand, whether it's personal or at work. And there were multiple times actually where I left work due to a panic attack, jumped in the car and drove to a beach and just sat on the pier for a couple hours during the winter. I've done that because I just couldn't focus. And again, my symptoms just became so overwhelming. I just needed to go somewhere. I needed to be alone. And there's no better place to be alone than on a beach in February. Appetite disorder. I did okay with eating. I made sure that I ate well, eating relatively healthy. So my appetite was okay. Now, I certainly wasn't overeating. If nothing else, perhaps I wasn't eating as much because, again, being anxious a lot, my nerves feeling shot a lot, it was difficult to eat at times, but I did force myself to make sure that I was eating, and I was eating relatively healthy. Agitation, yes. Another big one right there. Agitation. I was easily agitated because I was on edge all the time. I just felt under pressure all the time. And feeling that agitation, again, was kind of like fuel for me to gravitate to isolation, being alone, because I just didn't want to feel agitated. I had young kids and stuff, and they go over and break a lamp or something, of course I'd be agitated. And so I try to withdraw from as much as I could, just because I just didn't want to deal with that. the agitation was very much present in my disorder. And, you know, as I stand here now, suicidality, absolutely. This was a very common fantasy of mine. I am very proud, not so much for having these type of fantasies, but I'm proud for being strong enough, even in my darkest hour, recognizing that this is something that I could not subject my family to. So this is something, yes, unfortunately, it was a symptom that I did contend with a lot. But again, it's fantasy, it's, you know, it's that thought process where you're in that dark place. It's where your mind goes, and it's just the reality of this disorder when you are dealing with major depression. Okay, so with that said, if you look at the check marks that I have here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I have 5 checked off, but again, under the guilt, there's 3 more underlying symptoms there: worthlessness, hopelessness, and regret, and I suffered with them as well. So with you know, looking at my little checklist, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you know, I would easily be right around this area here on this Depression Severity Range Scale, right? So this kind of gives you an idea in terms of how you can self-assess with respect to the symptoms that you're feeling, because you're going to be true to yourself. So this gives you an example, again, in terms of how you can use this tool. Number one, through knowledge, understanding the different severities, but also understanding the primary symptoms, organizing them in this way, and looking at them and asking yourself a few questions. You know, how are you over here? How are you over here? And somewhere along this line, you're going to put a little red dot, and that's going to give you an indication as to, okay, how severe is the episode that I'm dealing with at this very moment. And if you're anywhere from the middle this way, you better get help. Especially if you're on this end of the scale. You really need to get help, because yes, as much as I feel that there's no way I would ever entertain that, it's not to say things wouldn't change if I left my symptoms unresolved, if I never went and got help, if I just let it erode my mental being. Who knows where this could have ended. But the bottom line is that because I was over here, you know, that was serious. So luckily for me, I got help, and that, you know, was a huge starting point in my journey, my mental journey. But again, if you do your self-assessment and you go through some of these over here, and maybe you do fall maybe over here. Okay, maybe you are at the low end of the depression range scale, and you know, maybe you don't need to go see a psychiatrist, but you should. I encourage you, you should seek help. Number one is your doctor. Go see your doctor, or if not your doctor, go see somebody that you can talk to and trust, and you know, whoever that may be in your life. But at this end of the severity range scale, you know, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can just ignore it and move on, because eventually, if you leave these symptoms unresolved, it will break you down over time till you get to a point possibly where, you know, you start feeling more of these primary symptoms than you did before. And if that does happen, you're going to make your way over toward this higher severity with respect to mental illness, and that's something you want to avoid. So be proactive, be responsible in your mental health. See where you are on this scale if you haven't already done so, or if you haven't already sought help, and get help. Regardless of where you are, get help, because you want to catch this and you want to be proactive, and you do not want these symptoms to stew on their own. Thank you for watching. I hope you got something out of today's video. I just wanted to mention that much of the content on my channel is inspired by my self-help book entitled A Deep Well Perspective for Healing in Depression, introducing 7 action steps to overcoming depressive symptoms. You can find it on Amazon, and I've provided a link to my book in the description box below. Check it out. And remember, on this channel, there is hope always.